Hey guys, want to do something I've never done before, which is pack for a backpacking trip on camera. Um, it used to be a really big deal when I would pack for trips because I'd only go on like one, maybe two a year, and so it would be like this whole ordeal where I would dump out all this stuff and kind of wade through it and figure out what I wanted to take and what I didn't want to take and everything. And over the past few years, I've gone on enough trips that it's really kind of come down to a science. It's much faster and quicker for me, so I just kind of wanted to go through my process, talk about some gear, where I'm at right now, and basically just pack on camera for this trip that I'm doing. I should start by talking about the conditions. So it's early September. We're going to be up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire doing the Pemi Loop. Conditions are supposed to be pretty much perfect. Forecast temperatures in the 70s during the day, supposed to be clear skies, and at night maybe etching down to about 60 degrees. These forecast temperatures are for the town of Lincoln, New Hampshire, which is the closest town to the route. As a mental note for myself, I usually try to subtract 10 or 15 degrees as the mountain temperature for that, knowing that when you're up high and you're a little bit more exposed, there's wind, things like that, you're outside of the city. Not that Lincoln's a city, outside of the town, it's usually a little bit colder. So that's sort of what I'm packing for in terms of the route. It's going to be lots of elevation. It's going to be about 35 miles total. So it's going to be a strenuous trip, so I don't want to take more weight than I have to. And yeah, that's about it. So first thing we'll dive into, and maybe I'll come a little bit closer. But obviously starting with a backpack. So when you've been backpacking for a while, or doing any hobby for a while, you'll eventually get to a point where you want to start to customize the off-the-shelf gear to make it a little bit more fitting for your taste. I'll just take this out so it's not as crinkly. This was an REI Flash backpack that I got on sale. They had them on sale for like a year. I don't know why they weren't selling. But I made a bunch of adjustments to it, basically cutting things off. You can see you can kind of see some of the cut marks. There used to be a metal frame around the edge here. Obviously that's gone. This thing's all bendy now. There's a little bit of padding. Wasn't able to take out, but you know, if I pack it wrong, I've definitely had things jabbing into me, so it takes a little bit of skill to pack it, which is something I'm going to talk more about in a little bit. But I basically just cut a bunch of straps off, cut some things out that I wasn't using, like there was a water bottle bladder, like sleeve in here that I cut out. Basically shortened all the straps, like the hip belt strap. It's kind of, I don't know if you can tell on there, it's not as nice and neatly cut as it was when it came from the factory, but they actually ended up cutting the weight of the bag down by about 25% when I weighed it before and after I sort of went to town on it. So lots of little things. I've never missed them. I've never needed them. So, you know, it's just extra weight that I don't have to carry. The next stage after modifying off-the-shelf gear is building your own gear, where you like buy giant rolls of nylon and sew yourself a backpack on like an industrial sewing machine, but I'm not quite at that level yet. So this is where I'm at. The other thing I took out of here is just like a giant trash bag. People talk about trash contractor bags. They're a little bit thicker than this. I actually like this as clear. It makes it easier when everything's kind of jammed into your backpack. If you're digging around, you can see, get light in. So I just throw everything. Basically the way I use my backpack is I have the main pocket, which is just this giant inner pocket. And then I have the lid for the small essentials. This is what sort of goes behind my head when I'm hiking. And then there's some mesh on the outside for throwing things that you want to be able to have quick access to, like water bottles and stuff like that. One thing this backpack doesn't have it. Some backpacks have a little zip off area at the bottom for adding, like for a sleeping bag, so you can access that more quickly. I actually do have another backpack that has that feature, and I just never use it. I like that this sort of, that the trash bag on the inside forces you to think about what's going in and what's coming out. Basically, the way that I pack is that the last things that I'll be taking out end up being the first things that go in. So when I get to camp, I'm going to want to take out food. I'm going to take out my clothes to put those on, get the stove out so I can start making dinner. And then I'm going to want to set up shelter. And then when the shelter's set up, then I'm going to want to put my sleeping bag in, take that out of my backpack. So I don't really ever act as my sleeping bag during the day. So having it be accessible or easy to reach doesn't really seem that useful. So even in a backpack that has that feature, I don't really use it. So we'll talk about sleeping bags. This is what I'm currently using. This is a Sea to Summit TKI 1. It is their summer bag. I guess it's not really a summer bag. It's a 32-degree bag. It's pretty versatile. I would say I have loved it for the past few years. I am potentially considering switching to a quilt. But the thing I do love about this is that it's semi-rectangular, and you can unzip the whole thing into basically a giant blanket. And I didn't unzip the foot box. You can. It just is kind of a pain to put the zippers back together. So you can see this part still zips together. But these zippers actually do go all the way around the edge. So I can fully unzip it, open it up like a book, and then use it as a blanket. So that's really cool. It's nice if you're like in a group or you're, just having a cozy day at the park and you want a blanket to either sit on or throw over yourself. So it's really nice. It's a down bag, which if you're not familiar, the two main concepts of sleeping bags in terms of loft are either synthetic loft or down loft. And down is generally a little bit lighter for the same temperature rating. So if you have another bag that's exactly the same and it's rated to 32 degrees and it's used as a synthetic insulation, it's going to be a little bit heavier and it's not going to pack down quite as nicely. I'll demonstrate that in a second, how nicely this packs down. And it'll be a little bit more expensive. Down's usually a little bit more expensive. People say down doesn't work when it's wet. That's kind of the main knock against it. I would say tell that to ducks that are made of down and are wet constantly, and they seem fine. No, that's kind of a joke. I realize it's not a valid argument because the way it sits in here is very different than the way it does when it's on their feathers and covered in all their oils and stuff. But I don't know, if I was canoeing or doing something where I knew myself would be getting wet, kayaking, then I would definitely consider a synthetic bag. But generally I try to think about the conditions that I'm going out in, check the weather. It's not supposed to rain this weekend. If I did see that there was a huge storm in the forecast and I figured I'd be getting so wet that my sleeping bag had a chance of getting wet, I'd probably just consider canceling the trip instead. So as a backpacker, I think you often don't really need the protection that a synthetic bag offers. If you're just a car camper, or if you're doing a lot of paddling, canoeing or kayaking or something like that, then it's maybe worth getting a synthetic bag. And maybe saving a few bucks. It's a little bit heavier, but it's a little bit more versatile. Yeah, so this is it. You can see it packed down pretty small. I actually haven't even pulled any of the compression straps on this. Let me just see, is it tangled? Yes. So this thing actually compresses down pretty tiny, and I don't even usually compress it this much because I use it as kind of the foundation for all the other gear in my bag. So if it's too small, then there's just like extra room at the bottom of my bag and then things fall down. And so I'm just gonna compress it down to show you, but I'm actually not even gonna pack it like this. So this doesn't take much effort at all. If I really wanted to cinch it, I could like sit on it or something like that and pull the straps. But you can see this is already about the size of a football, and I haven't really had to put any effort into compressing it. So I'm actually gonna let these back out. I don't want it to stay compressed for too long. I need it to be able to lock back up for warmth this weekend. So you can see it's already kind of filling back out, which is good. So we'll throw that in as kind of the bottom layer of the backpack. I think I mentioned this before, but there's a lot of backpacking, there's a lot of aspects of backpacking where you can make it more convenient or pleasant for yourself by either buying gear and carrying that extra gear, or just like learning the appropriate skills and having a little bit of finesse, and then you don't need to carry the gear and the weight. There's a million different aspects of like cooking and campcraft and setting up and gear selection. There's that kind of thesis about like, the weight in the knowledge you carry in your brain weighs nothing, and it can make your trip way more comfortable than buying a bunch of specially purposed gear. So I guess the example I'm talking about now is like, I have to put a little bit of thought into how I pack my backpack because I don't have a metal frame. If I just throw all my stuff in there, I'm probably gonna get pretty uncomfortable as things are jabbing against my back. So I do try to put, soft things against my back, heavier things like a stove and stuff like that on the outside. But that's just one of those little things where, putting a little thought into it goes a long way. I think I did mention with the sleeping bag, I'm considering upgrading. Once I get a couple $100s of disposable income that I can fire away on something like this, I think I would upgrade to a quilt. There's a lot of different considerations for that. Basically, a quilt is a sleeping bag that doesn't close all the way around you. It's kind of open. You can kind of pull around you. But the idea is when you're in a sleeping bag, the way it keeps you warm is by lofting. You know, it's on your chest, and you have some amount of loft that the insulation's providing you, and that's a pocket of hot air that protects you from, you know, the cold air that's swirling around you. But when it's underneath you, when you're laying on top of it, your body weight's compressing it, and so you're not really getting any loft, you're not really getting any warmth or insulation from that, so it's kind of just like wasted insulation. So quilts are kind of more purpose-built. Again, one of the benefits I like about my current sleeping bag is that I can open it up like a big rectangular blanket. Quilts are not like that. They're very kind of custom. It's like almost a mummy bag, if you've seen those, where it's kind of tight. They're generally lighter. They're a little bit more, they're tailored more to the ultralight community. People use them for sleeping on the ground, and some people have like, you know, a strap or something that goes underneath their sleeping pad. I'm a hammock camper. I don't like sleeping on the ground. Once you sleep up in the trees, you'll never go back. But the insulation setup's a little bit different for hammock stuff, which I'll talk about here in a second. Okay, so that's just one thing. The next big thing is shelter. So this is my hammock. It's a Hennessy hammock. I'm not going to take it out to show it to you because there's a lot of little pieces in here, but basically this is an example of sort of a backpacking hammock that comes with everything. So it's not just the hammock that you might see people hanging out in at the park. It's also got an integrated bug net. It comes with like a tarp that goes over it to keep the rain off, wind off, things like that. It's got all the suspension stuff you need. I've got some straps in here. I threw a couple of my own carabiners in here just to make the setup process a little bit faster. So I wouldn't say I've customized it. I've sort of added some accessories. Potentially down the line, a hammock is a very simple thing to create. You just kind of take some nylon and fold it over itself and triple stitch everything. So I might play around with making my own at some point, but the Hennessy hammock is super convenient. I'll even tell you a quick story. A lot of people are intimidated with a hammock because there's a lot of knots and ropes and suspension and things you have to set up, but I was actually on a hike by myself a little over a year ago in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and for a number of various reasons, I wasn't really prepared. It started raining. I missed a turn in the trail, got really confused, lost, started getting disoriented, and it wasn't until I started vocalizing where I thought I was and where I thought I was going, and I realized I was slurring my words, and I put my hand down to lower myself down on a rock, and I couldn't feel the rock through my hand. And that's when there was enough of my brain functioning left to remember, hey, you're getting hypothermic. These are all really bad things that are happening. And so I was descending a mountain, and there was nowhere that there would have been flat ground anywhere around me, but because I didn't need that to set up a tent for a shelter, I just basically turned off the trail, and there were a bunch of trees. And even with my really numb fingers, I was worried, you know, I need my dexterity to be able to flick my lighter to get my stove going, but I was kind of nervous about sitting on my hammock, but the knots that I practiced, I had done so many times, they're so simple, and I just kind of do a little, I don't remember the name of it, some kind of hitch, throw it over the carabiner, clipped it in. It was so fast, and honestly, part of that might have helped save my life, just being able to set that up and be able to get out of the rain, get my clothes on. I was also talking earlier about being able to pack your bag and also unpack it efficiently. That also helped because in the pouring rain, I had to be able to take out my clothes, put those on, keep myself dry, set up my shelter without my sleeping bag getting wet, take out my sleeping bag and put it in the hammock without it getting wet. So all of these little things that you don't think of as skills, like unpacking a backpack or clipping a hammock up, it's one of those, they can be those things where as you get better at it and as you kind of finesse it a little more, it can really contribute to being able to set up camp very quickly and also emergently and potentially save your life if you find yourself in a situation that I found myself in. So, I don't think I have anything else to say about the hammock. I love it. Might look one day into building some of my own setup there. The other thing about it that I don't really love that I have right now, this is sort of the under insulation. So I mentioned when your sleeping bag's underneath you and there's no loft. One of the things people get surprised by when they spend a night in a hammock, which I did the first couple of times I was in it, was even if it's a warm night, if you're laying against the nylon, there's this called cold butt syndrome, CBS. People talk about it on hammocking forums, but it's basically like your butt's gonna get cold because you're pressing right against that nylon. Even if you're wearing like flannel pants or whatever, like your weight is on top of it and pressing it against that nylon. The nylon's holding you up, so you have basically no insulation between the skin on your backside and the outside exterior. So when a little light gust of wind comes, you get a shiver. So the idea with hammock insulation is that you want to hang something underneath the hammock. So, you know, anything that's in the hammock with you is going to get compressed against the hammock, but anything that's hanging below has a chance to loft up. So this is basically two things. This came from Hennessy Hammocks. I really don't like this packaging that it came in. It's like this weird tube that's open at both ends. Like, I don't really get who thought this was a good idea. I mean, I've considered maybe putting it in a stuff sack because I feel like you can press it down, but this shape is just so weird to pack. I mean, I guess I could throw it in one of my old stuff sacks and see if that's better. But basically it comes with, I'm not gonna take it all out, but there's, this is basically like kind of insulating foam. It's got like an egg carton shape to it, so it kind of scoops. And then the other piece that's in here is basically just a nylon thing that hangs underneath. So basically you clip this underneath the hammock so you have this little foam piece that hangs below, and then if it's like windy or raining or something like that, you don't want it to get wet, you can also add this underneath the foam as kind of just like a shell layer protection against wind and water and stuff like that. So when you have this clipped on, then you have your sleeping bag or your quilt over top of you, and you have your under quilt for your hammock, keeping you warm from the bottom. So again, this is very like hammock specific stuff I'm getting into right now, but yeah, not a huge fan of how this packs. I don't know if you can see, it's just kind of like hanging out. So I usually have to kind of shove it in, which I'm not a big fan of, but. So those are kind of the big three: backpack, sleeping insulation, and shelter. Those, I kind of went into more detail on those, but the rest of the stuff should be pretty quick. I'll talk about my cook kit. I love this. So this is everything that I eat and prepare food with. I will say REI accidentally sent me this. This is a 0.7 liter titanium pot. I ordered something else, and they sent me the thing I ordered, and also this was in the box. And I called them, and I was like, hey, you guys sent me this thing that I didn't order. And the person was like, well, we have a cutoff that if we accidentally send you something that's more than $50, you have to send it back. And this was like $49.99 or something like that, so they let me keep it, which was awesome on REI's part. But I don't know that I would have had the courage to spend $50 on a pot, but knowing how awesome it is now and how well it works, I would definitely encourage people. It's very light. The other thing I love about it is how great, so my whole cook kit is actually inside here, so I'm gonna take it out. So it comes with this little lid. The lid's got this thing to hang on the side if you don't want to like get it covered in wood chips or whatever when you set it down in camp and then it's covered in mud. You can kind of just hang it from the side while you're eating, which is great. And then we'll just take out the stuff that's inside it. I've got a little, I've got a little Bic lighter. These little Bic minis, I think you can get them in like 2 or 3 packs. I keep one on my stove. I have another one that I keep in my small essentials bag, which I'll show you in a second. You can never have too many of these things. They're so cheap, they're so light. Fire is such an essential thing to have. It's stupid not to have redundancy. So I have these, and I also have some matches. I'll talk about those in a little bit. The other main thing is the fuel source. So this is a canister. There's all kinds of different blends of fuel, but generally the canisters all have the same opening. So you can, you know, this is the jet boil one. I do have a jet boil stove. I haven't used it in a while because I switched to this much lighter system. But basically any of these canister things should work. I actually love that when they made this 0.7 liter pot, they sized it perfectly so that the canister is just snug right in and there's not too much rattling around. So that's great. So it's just so convenient. And then this is the actual stove itself. So it's obviously very small. And I'll just show you. So these things kind of pivot around. They open up. We've got these little pot stabilizers that swing out. And then this is the little control arm here. So basically you just screw this on top of your fuel canister, start it so you can hear it kind of rushing, and then you flick the lighter. It doesn't even have to have gas in it. All it needs is the spark. The spark will ignite the canister that's coming out here. And 0.7 liters, I can bring that to a boil depending how cold the water was starting initially in like 3 to 5 minutes. If I wanted to go even lighter, what a lot of people do is they switch to alcohol-based stoves, where essentially you still have a pot, and then instead of carrying this canister, which a knock against it is that you can't really refill it. So this one is probably like 70% empty right now, which makes me a little nervous because I'm going backpacking and I don't want to run out of fuel. Usually when it starts to get really low, I'll save it and I'll take it if I'm going car camping. That way I can bring a whole bunch of them, and if one of them runs out and making dinner, I can just go grab another one, and I don't, can't make dinner that night. I think we'll be good for this weekend. I'm probably just going to make dinner 3 to 5 minutes of boiling water for dinner, and then maybe 3 to 5 minutes the next morning, so I think we should be good. But you don't really have a way to refill it. You don't really have a way to know exactly how much is in it. People do things like you could float it in a pot of water, and a full canister will sink more, and a lighter canister will float because there's air in it, but you're kind of just playing a guessing game with how much you have left and how much you need. So that's not super great. With the alcohol stoves, you basically just bring a small little water bottle of the alcohol. I'm not an expert on that, so I don't know exactly what kind of alcohol it is. But with that, people just bring, you don't even need a stove like this. People just bring like a cat food can or a tuna can, and you just pour some of the alcohol in and light it. And there's no flame control. Like with this, I can turn it up. I can make it a roaring boil. I can turn it down and kind of do a simmer, slow boil. With alcohol, it's just on fire. There's no control. And that means you also can't put it out. Like if your water boils and there's still a bunch of alcohol in there, there's no way, like if you just dump the alcohol on the ground, then now you've just started a forest fire. It doesn't go out. So there's no real way to put it out, which I don't like. There's no real control over it, which I don't really like. So even though this isn't the most ultralight option, I think for the convenience and for the speed of being able to get water going, I really like it. Also in that situation I described, when I was like hypothermic and needed to heat myself quickly, being able to boil water in like 3 minutes as opposed to 15 or 20 minutes was another one of those like little small factors that ended up being pretty clutch. So I'm pretty happy with this. Everything fits inside the pot. These little handles on the outside of the pot just fold in, so that's pretty cool. And it goes in this little netting bag, which I didn't like at first because it's not the most convenient to put in, but I actually kind of like it. Gives it some character. You got to fiddle with it. You got to like take your time. You got to really consider what you're doing. So it goes in a little like mesh bag. Got that drawstring. Probably don't need that little buckle. I could take it off, but whatever. Like I said, I like the character that this adds. So yeah, there is most of my key stuff. In terms of other gear, I'm just gonna put this over here so it doesn't knock over my cider. I've got my clothes, which are basically just in this little ditty bag. What I've got in here is basically just, since it's gonna be a warm weekend, I'm not really bringing a lot of cold weather gear. Forecast temps are supposed to be in the low 60s, so with mountain weather, I'm saying that's like low 50s. So my sleeping bag's rated to 30-something degrees. I have my underquilt. I should be plenty toasty. I just have a pair of long johns in here. These are like Patagonia. I don't know how old these are. I've had them for so long. I mean, look at the brand new. These things are such good quality. They don't smell at all. They have that like Patagonia odor control stuff in them. Like, I mean, I wash them obviously after I wear them, but they're just great. And then I also have another, it's like a zip top, like little quarter zip thing. This is also great. Very lightweight. I've learned to get the lightest weight stuff because it keeps you warm, but it also breathes well. And then the other thing in here, which I always love, one of my favorite pieces of gear, is this little neck buff. You've probably seen these. People have these. It's great when it's cold out. Keeping your neck insulated really helps keep you warm. It's also great when it's sunny, which is going to be sunny this weekend because I burn pretty easily. And the only thing I hate more than getting sunburned is putting on sunscreen or wearing sunscreen. So I'm a big fan of wearing like long sleeves and a wide brim cap and all that kind of like awkward dad look when it's gonna be sunny out, just because I'd rather not be all oily and slathered in sunscreen. So this thing's clutch. I wear it at night when it's cold. I wear it during the day when it's hot. It's great. The other thing I'll always bring is an extra pair of socks. I almost never change into my extra pair of socks, but socks are one of those things that are just so clutch. If I like busted a hole in it or they got like really wet or something was wrong with the pair that I was wearing, I don't want to be able to change into them. So this is basically like my sleeping outfit in here. And then obviously I'm wearing shorts, t-shirt, sunglasses, and a baseball cap, and then trail running shoes. Not this particular pair, but this same model. These are kind of like my daily hikers. The treads are super worn down on these ones, but I have another pair that I just used for hiking that has much better tread. So I love them because they're light. They breathe really well, which means your feet don't sweat as much, which means you don't get blisters as much. They're just easier to hike in, lighter boots. The whole thing about leather boots being waterproof is kind of BS, because anything that has a giant hole in the top is going to let water in. If it's raining, it's going to run down your leg. If you step in a puddle or a river, it's going to come in over the top. So there's no such thing as a waterproof boot. It just means that it's going to take forever to dry. If you get a boot like that wet on the inside, it's going to be wet for days, and you're going to be hiking in a wet boot. These things, I've straight up just like walked through rivers when I couldn't find an easy way around, and after 10 or 15 minutes of hiking, they're dry again. So it's fantastic. No comparison. I would never go back to boots. I would never recommend anyone wears boots unless you have like some extenuating ankle problem. The other argument against boots is that like, oh, they protect your ankle. Well, so your knee is a hinge joint, right? Which means it moves kind of just in like one dimension. It swings forward and backwards. Whereas, your hip, but also more importantly, your ankle is a ball and socket. You have all this movement in here. So if you're going to step on something and your foot's going to go like this, it's much better for your ankle to do that rotation than trying to lock your ankle into a forward hinge the same way your knee is, and then it gets, so that lateral movement gets transferred to your knee and to your hip and all these like weird places that aren't meant to take it. Like your ankle's meant to walk on uneven ground. Let it. There's no, I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you there's no reason. Some people might have a medical reason, but in general, let your ankle joint do what it's supposed to do. It's okay if you step on uneven ground. And yeah, another con, I guess, of the lighter trail running shoes is that the soles are really like bendy, so I took it off. I could sort of bend the shoe in half. With a hiking boot, you have a really rigid sole. That's kind of the analogy I would make there, is like driving a sports car where you kind of feel the road versus driving an Escalade where you're kind of insulated from the road. You don't really feel it, but it's a more comfortable ride. Obviously a big leather hiking boot that's got a plate of metal in the bottom of it. If you step on a rock that's really sharp and pointy like this, you stand on that, and if you've got that metal shank in the bottom of your foot, you're not even going to feel it. You're just going to feel like you just have this metal plate that's everywhere you put your foot, and it's always smooth and it's always consistent. Whereas, these trail running shoes, if you step on that, it's gonna kind of wrap around and you're gonna feel it. So you have to pay a little bit more attention to where you put your feet. But again, you feel the rock surface a little bit better. You have a sense of what you're hiking on. You feel things underfoot, which if your feet aren't used to that, can give you blisters, can be annoying and painful. But again, it's one of those things where a little bit of effort, sort of watching where you step and paying attention to where you're going, can really avoid most of the issue there. And then you don't have to carry around that metal plate on every single step. Every time you lift your foot, 30, 40,000 steps a day when you're hiking, that adds up to a lot of energy that you're saving, a lot of strain on your muscles that you're not putting out. So anyways, those are my clothes. The other thing that's not in here that I just got, and I'm really excited to test out, this is a down vest from Uniqlo. I'm a big fan of Uniqlo. Their stuff is like kind of anti-fashion. It's just like, here is a t-shirt, and it's simple, and it's $9, and it comes in navy and blue and black. And I'm like, great, I'll take a bunch of those and just wear them every day. So this is kind of their style. I was looking into a vest for a while. I got a Patagonia Nano Puff jacket a couple of years ago on a deep discount. It's bright orange. It's also not my size. It's probably 1 or 2 sizes larger than I should have ordered. I think that was the only size they had available because it was on sale. So it looks really goofy on me. I would never really wear it in civilization, but it worked pretty well as a backcountry jacket. I accidentally got a couple of holes poked in it over the years, but honestly, it was just like too warm was kind of the issue. Like when I put it on, it had long sleeves, and if I tried to sleep in it, I'd get really hot and have to take it off in the middle of the night. So again, it's one of those things where you might say, oh, well, I don't want to be cold, so you bring something really warm, but then it ends up being too warm. And so really kind of understanding the sweet spot and not just like over preparing for every contingency. So the nice thing about a vest, obviously it's not as warm. You can vent your armpits, which is great, helps you cool off. And you just have more control over your temperature. So this is a down vest. I originally looked at one from Patagonia. I ordered it when it was on sale. And the material was like so swishy, like even 10 times more than this. I just couldn't, I like wore it around the apartment just to try it around for like 15 minutes. I couldn't stand it. So I returned that. And I was in a Uniqlo and I had heard about their vest. This was maybe like a third or a fourth of the price of the Patagonia one. It's a down vest. It comes in this little bag, which is handy, but even this bag is like too big. I mean, you can see talking about down and how compressible it is. You know, this is a big vest and it, you know, is the size of an orange, fits in my fist. So I'm excited to try that out this weekend. Again, it's not going to be super cold, so I'm not really putting it through its paces, but it should be really cozy and vent well. Okay, so that's all my installation stuff. I'm going to skip over the food just because that's very personal, and not that I don't want to share it, but just it's going to depend on what your tastes are, so I don't know how much value I'll be able to share with you. The two things I will show you, I have, this is probably like 30 feet of parachute cord. I ordered a big reel of it, I don't know, a long time ago. I was just sitting around and used it for various projects over the years and sort of kept this. I keep a little carabiner with it. That's probably overkill for the weight that I'm carrying when I'm hoisting my food up. So this is for hoisting your food up in a tree if there's bears, which actually in some of the Facebook groups that I'm in for hiking in the White Mountains, I've seen notices about there being an active bear in the Pemi region where we're going tomorrow. So interesting. I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk to the rangers when we get in and see what they recommend in terms of bear precautions. But I always hang my food. Honestly, it's more so for mice and rodents and small things that you're not going to hear or see or be scared of, but they'll eat your food while you're sleeping and then you'll have no food the next day, and that's a major bummer. So I always hang my food. And I've experimented with different things. This is like, I don't know, Sea to Summit. It's like a roll top bag. They sell it as like, oh, it's for your group trash. People put trash in it, but it also works really well as a food bag. For one night, it's probably a little overkill. I can probably stretch this to like 3 or 4 nights in terms of the amount of food it can carry. I believe this is the 10-liter version, but I'll throw my food in here and I'll just keep this handy in the lid of my backpack so that I can hang it up. The carabiner, I also scribbled on with a black marker because I have a couple of these ones that are identical. And because this carabiner gets like thrown up over trees and banged against rocks and stuff like that, it has all these like nicks and cuts and scratches and gashes and stuff. So if I ever needed a carabiner to like carry my weight or carry somebody in an emergency situation, the Sharpie is just to remind me that this is not, you know, even though it says it can hold, 25 kilonewtons or whatever that is on the long axis, this thing has gotten so beat up that I would absolutely not trust it to do that. So any gear that you're relying on in like potentially life-saving situations, you should understand what its limits are. And carabiners are not meant to be thrown around and tossed into rocks and stuff like that. They're not going to have their same strength. So that's just how I demarcate that. So that's kind of my food stuff. Oh, the other thing that might be interesting that I'll talk about real quick is my water situation. So I play around with water a lot. There's a million different ways to skin the cat when it comes to like getting and treating water in the backcountry. I regularly do a terrible job at this. There have been so many hikes where I come home and I'm like, I did not drink enough water. So I think last summer I finally found my sweet spot, and I'm going to just do it again on this trip and make sure everything looks good. Basically, I have 2 of these. These are, I'll come up to the camera. These are 1 liter platypus kind of roll-up bags. So it's just this kind of like soft-sided. Like if you have a water bladder, it's the same idea. Water bladder is usually 2 or 3 liters. I don't like water bladders. I've hiked with them before. The main reason I don't like them is because you can't tell how much water is left in them when you're hiking, and I've had situations where I've run out unexpectedly and not been near water to refill. Also, it's against your back oftentimes, which means it gets hot, and it's just not really that pleasant. I guess it's convenient if you have that thing like poking you in the face, but I don't know, I like being conscientious about water. So basically what I do is I fill this this basically gets filled with dirty water. So you kind of have a dirty water system and a clean water system. So this I like dunk in the river or lake or wherever I'm getting my water from. So it'll have all kinds of little floaties in it. The water will be yellow or brown or whatever color it is, that's fine. And then what I do is I have one of these. This is a Sawyer Mini, I believe. There's a Sawyer Squeeze, which is a little bit smaller than this. It's like 1 ounce lighter, but the amount of water that flows through it is much smaller, so it's kind of annoying to drink through. For a while, what I would do is I would just screw it on, and then I would just kind of like suck the dirty water through it. So the dirty water's in here, and then there's a filter in here, and then as you're kind of pulling the water out the other end, it's clean and it's safe to drink, and it's filtered all the bacteria and gunk and stuff out of it. But putting your mouth directly on this and pulling water is, one, really annoying. Two, you suck down a lot of air, which then makes you really like burpy and uncomfortable, and it's like, I couldn't figure out what was wrong for a while. The other thing I don't like about doing this is that you can't mix anything with your water. If you're pulling it directly into your mouth and you want to add like Gatorade or lemonade or whatever, you don't really get a chance to do that. If you put it in here with your dirty water, it's just going to get all gunked up in the filter and ruin your filter, so don't do that. So that's when I sort of discovered I had this really old Nalgene from when I was a kid. This is actually a 16 ounce. It's like half a liter Nalgene. Really anything as like a cup would suffice. But basically what I'll do is I will fill up 1 liter of water. So this is 1 liter, this is half a liter. I will fill up 1 liter of water. I will immediately, while I'm sort of seated at the water source I'm filling up, I will put half a liter, so I'll put half of this into my little Nalgene to sort of fill it up. Then I can add my Crystal Light or my Gatorade or whatever, and I drink it down right away. So there's this concept of like cameling up, which is basically when you're at the water source, drink the water while you're there. Water is one of the heaviest things you can carry. A 1 liter water bottle is like 2.2 pounds. 1 liter of water, just the water without the bottle. So if you're carrying 2 or 3 liters of water, that's like 6 or 7 pounds, which might add like 10 or 20% to the load of your backpack, which is not negligible. So that's part of the reason I get myself in trouble being dehydrated sometimes, is because I try to like thread that gap between staying hydrated and bringing water with you as you're hiking, but also not carrying too much, because then your pack is like really heavier than it needs to be. So what I usually do is I'll fill up, put half of it in here, drink it down right away. I'll have Gatorade or whatever in it, and then I'll leave the other half liter of dirty water in here, and I'll hike with that. So I have half a liter of dirty water, and then, you know, if it's been an hour since I last drank and I know the next water source isn't coming up for a while, then I will go ahead and put the other half of this dirty water through the filter, so now it's clean, drink that down. Now I'm carrying no water, and hopefully I would only do that if I had done enough research to know how far the next water source was, how reliable it was, whether it might be dried up, whether it might be really muddy and gucky and gross. So obviously trying to avoid those situations. But for this hike, we're going to be up on a ridge line. The Pemi Loop is kind of like a big ridge along mountains. So, you know, water generally flows down mountains, not up mountains. So when we're up on the ridge, I'm not really expecting to find much water. So I'm actually going to bring a second one of these on this hike, which kind of drives me crazy in one sense, because we're doing so much elevation up and down mountains, and so carrying an extra 2 pounds of water is kind of annoying. But I also know on hikes when I've run out and gotten dehydrated, it's very unpleasant. I get some pretty bad headaches. All my joints hurt. Like, there's all, you know, obviously dehydration is bad when you're hiking or doing any sort of exertion. So I'm just going to suck it up, carry the extra 2 pounds, and hopefully stay nice and hydrated on this trip. So that is my water system. I'll go through the last little bits quickly because we're already, almost 40 minutes. So my first aid kit. This is my everyday first aid kit. Where is my... So that's the one I usually take with me when I'm like just out around town. It's just got like a couple Band-Aids and some pills in it. I think I have an article where I go into more detail on this. I'm not going to take everything out. Normally when I go by myself, I wouldn't bring this. In my small essentials bag, this one, I have a couple Advil, a couple Imodium. So Advil, obviously, for like your aches and pains and, you know, my knees hurt, that kind of stuff. Imodium for if you eat some bad food or have bad camp hygiene and have to poop a lot and you can't hike when you're pooping a lot, which can be dangerous. Some antihistamines, Benadryl in here. Some people use it as a sleep aid. I don't usually like to or need to. That's kind of more for allergies. And then some Pepto, just as another like tummy pleaser, just because sometimes it can be nice to have that. And then there's like a Band-Aid in here, and then there's some duct tape. And that's what I usually take with me as a first aid kit. So if I'm going with somebody else, I'm comfortable taking a risk myself that I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable taking somebody else with. The guy I'm going with, it's one of his first backpacking trips. So I'm trying to have a wider margin of error. That's why I'm bringing extra water, bringing a little bit extra food, bringing some first aid kit stuff, just because when you're with somebody else, it's just good to have a little bit of leeway. When you're by yourself, you can take more risks. But this has, most importantly for being with someone else, it's got gloves in here. So if he's bleeding and I need to get in there and work on some stuff, I don't have to get his blood all over me. Got some gauze in here, ACE wrap, pretty standard for the most common injury. Well, the two most common injuries you're gonna have are one, blisters. So I've got some safety pins in here for kind of lancing that, letting the pus strain out, and then putting a little bit of like ointment, you know, that like, I don't remember what it's called, but it's like the triple antibiotic thing that sort of keeps it protected, keeps it smooth, and also keeps it from getting infected, and then just like a Band-Aid or a piece of tape or something. So that's number one in terms of most common injuries. Number two being some kind of like knee or ankle sprain, so having an ACE wrap to help support it. Also, I always hike with hiking poles, so having those as an extra set of, you know, kind of going from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive, if you will. So that kind of handles most of it. But there's some other stuff in here in case of like a really deep wound I have to wash out with water. Got some steri strips, a couple other things. I have an article about first aid kits that goes into way more detail. So yeah, there's that. Small essentials kit, I already talked to you about what's in most of it. There's also a teeny tiny little pocket knife that really just has a knife and a pair of tweezers. I've got another lighter in here. Got some safety pins. Got some S-bit cubes. These are like little white, they're almost like wax, but they're not wax. It's like some kind of material where you can kind of just hold a lighter up to them for a few seconds and then it just burns for like 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have to start an emergency fire and it's wet out and all the wood is wet and you're trying to start a fire, like you can put little twigs and stuff over it, and after 10 or 15 minutes, they'll probably have most of the steam will have burned off and you can burn them. So it's a pretty sure fire starter method for like kindling, I guess. And then just a small little backup headlamp in here, tiny little one that puts out like a little 1 watt, whatever. I don't know what it actually is. And then a whistle for emergency signaling. So this is like my small essentials. I always try to keep this with me. So first aid kit, small essentials, my water kit, and then the other stuff I'm bringing here is just sanitary stuff: toothbrush, toothpaste, chapstick, sunscreen, toilet paper, and all of this stuff, minus the water bottles, but all of the rest of the small essentials will go in the lid of my backpack. I usually put like a giant gallon-sized backpack or Ziploc in there just to keep everything in. Then if it starts raining, everything's, well, it's already organized in these smaller bags, but then it's inside this larger bag, so that really helps. And then the last things are really just navigation. So I've got a Nat Geo map that has been awesome. I bought it way before I was as hardcore of a hiker, and I've used it on basically planning all of the hikes that I've done over the last few years in the Whites. I usually take a picture of it so I have the relevant section on my phone, so I can pull that up easily while I'm going. If I want to check the trail, I don't have to like take it out of my backpack and unfold it if it's like windy and try to find the section and everything. It's nice to just have it on your phone. But I do keep this as a backup. Sometimes I will print out topo maps on CalTopo if I really want to go crazy with navigation. But where I'm hiking in the Whites, the trails are so well blazed, they're so highly trafficked that I don't want to say it's impossible to get lost. Obviously, like I told my story before, I did miss a turn and kind of got disoriented. I wasn't off trail, but if you really have some skills about staying found, so like anytime you're at a trail junction, just double check the signs that are at the junction, double check your map, make sure you know where you are at the right junction. Anytime you're near water, I try to glance and be like, okay, this is the small pond that I expected, or this is the river crossing that I was expecting. So just trying to check in, keep track of blazes. Most of the trees have, those kind of 2-inch by 4-inch colored paint marks. So just keeping track of those. There are not as many of them in wilderness areas, but I don't want to say you won't get lost. But again, it's one of those things where, having the skills can save you a lot of trouble. So that's kind of what I pay attention to. And the other thing I bring, this is just a satellite communication device. It says DeLorme. The company's actually, I got this a couple of years ago. It's been acquired by Garmin. This is mostly for my wife. She lovingly called it the boyfriend tracker when we started dating. Basically, this just lets me communicate with her or anyone when I don't have cell phone service. So there's sort of a clunky interface to view maps and send messages on here, but it also pairs to your phone with Bluetooth. So if you don't have service, you can view maps, you can download base maps before you go on your trip, which I always do. And I can type out messages, which is great. So I can say, I'm a little behind schedule, I might get home after dinner, Or I can say things like, you know, I'm gonna push. There's an emergency beacon button on here which like goes to, you know, search and rescue. But I can send her a message and be like, I'm okay. I found another hiker who's on the trail who hit his head. I can communicate with search and rescue. I can tell them, you know, you need a helicopter. This is urgent. Or I can say it's not. You know, someone sprained their ankle. They're gonna need a bunch of people to help carry them out, but it's not that urgent. You know, there's no need for a high risk, speedy evacuation, things like that. So it's just like a nice communication tool to have for peace of mind. I usually just keep this clipped on my shoulder while I'm hiking, so I can, one, just make sure I always have it, look down and it's there, and it also gets good reception with the antenna poking up. So that's basically my gear. Yeah, the other thing I said, you know, big theme is just like what, you know, knowledge weighs nothing. So the more you know about skills and how to use things and little tips and tricks, the better. One thing I started doing actually after that trip I mentioned where I got hypothermic, I came home and I said something went wrong. And as a software engineer, I know whenever something goes wrong, you usually want to have a debrief. You want to say, how did this happen? How did we get here? What were the circumstances? So after that trip, I started a Google Doc where I just created a little trip report. I described the trip in like 2 or 3 paragraphs. I said, here's what went right, and I have just a bulleted list of things that went well. Here's what didn't go so well, bulleted list, and then here's things to improve for next time. And actually every backpacking trip I've been on, and even some of my just day hikes, I usually just throw an entry in there because there's always something to learn. And even if you don't think there is, just sitting down and taking 10 or 15 minutes to be like, what did I really like? And it was like, oh, you know, I brought like, you know, there's some new gear I'm testing out, my vest. I'll find out if I like that vest or not. I'll find out, you know, maybe I'll say, oh, in this temperature range, I don't actually need to bring the under quilt for my hammock. It was too hot. So there's always something that you're going to learn if you're paying attention to how comfortable you are, how convenient things are, what's uncomfortable, what's not going well. You just sort of are always making mental notes anyways as you're just existing in the backcountry. So trying to write that down and keep a record helps you avoid making the same mistakes again. And spending that time to kind of reflect on what you did and didn't like is really valuable in sort of progressing your skills quickly. So all this stuff's going to change. If I check in and do this again in a year, I'll probably have like some stuff that's new, some stuff that's the same. So you're always kind of learning, you're always kind of evolving. You're never really like done learning with a hobby like this or really any hobby. So anyways, that's where I'm at right now. And yeah, hope this was valuable. Hope this was useful to someone. Thanks.